Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we're remembering the monumental legacy of Isaac Hayes, who seems like he's still an omnipresent force in music because his legacy is one that I guarantee will go on and on. But he died in 2008, which, when you think of it that way, is quite a few years ago. But his influence, like I said, will live on. Now, people probably best remember him for that deep bass baritone voice that was pitch perfect, smooth as butter, and just absolutely indelible to the music that he created and to music of the 60s, 70s, 80s, and frankly beyond more widely. But he was a lot more than just that, even though that would have been enough. He was one of the best songwriters of all time, one of the best, I will say the best soul music arranger of all time. And he was an excellent, highly in demand session musician, which is where he began, being one of the in house session musicians at Stax Records, working, of course, very closely with the house band, Booker T and the MGs. Now, he formed a partnership, a songwriting partnership early on with a legend in his own right, David Porter. And between the two of them, they co wrote some of the most beloved songs of all time. Hold On, I'm Coming by Sam and Dave, absolutely legendary. So many songs that Johnny Taylor made famous. Other songs by Sam and Dave, When Something Is Wrong with My Baby, Soul Man, these are absolutely legendary songs. He wrote for the Soul Children, for the Emotions, so much with Carla Thomas. But it was really at the very tail end of the 60s when he launched a solo career that the world got to know the voice and the name behind some of the songs that they already loved. His albums were incredibly cohesive, and I think that that's because he was such a good arranger. For those who aren't familiar with the term, a music arranger is a term that essentially means orchestrator. You take a song, whether you've written it or someone else has written it, and you say, right, the strings will play this. I want the bass and the organ to do this. Let's put a bit of electric piano here. Let's put a solo cello here, etc. And Isaac, of course, did both. There's some arrangers who don't write, some writers who don't arrange, some people who do both. And Isaac Hayes did both. And his discography is just one that goes from absolute strength to strength. Hot Buttered Soul, his second solo album from 69, is generally considered his breakthrough, but it was really 1971, the soundtrack to the film starring Richard Roundtree, Shaft, that really captured global attention because the theme to that film is one of the most iconic songs, one of the most memorable songs, and one of the best songs of all time. And Isaac, of course, performed keyboards, he arranged it, he wrote it, and he sung on it, and it won him an Oscar for both his arranging and songwriting. And he performed it at the Oscars at a time when the Oscars was still a very buttoned down affair. And Isaac showed the world on an international telecast, which really meant something in the early 70s, that this was his image, this was his ethos, this was his vibe. It was one that was all about civil rights, about liberation in both a political, social, and artistic sense. And it was also in the early 70s that he became the headlining act for the Stax Festival, a music festival of Stax artists that was held at the LA Coliseum in the years following the Watts riots, which happened just a few miles away in 1965. It was a commemoration of civil rights leaders and just a beautiful artistic moment, which luckily was captured on film. I believe it's available for purchase and streaming on your Amazons and all of that other stuff. And the soundtrack, the full soundtrack, including some of the songs that didn't make the film version, is now on Spotify and all of those other places. The albums he did after again went from strength to strength. Black Moses, an absolute hit. Joy from 1973, possibly one of his, if not his best album. He did other soundtracks like Truck Turner, which music from there has been sampled by so many hip hop artists, not just from that album, of course, but throughout his career, which is really a symptom of being someone who writes songs that either have memorable portions or that are memorable on the whole. And that really is a testament to great production and great songwriting that so many hip hop artists, both in his lifetime and since, have sampled his music. He continued recording into the early and mid 80s. Then he took almost 10 years off before re-emerging in 1995 with not one but two albums, because clearly he had a lot of music in him, even though the nature of the music industry had changed by that time. But it was in the late 90s that he did something that introduced that famous voice, pardon me, speaking of famous voices, to a whole new audience. And this is when he decided to take a voiceover role in a cartoon that was fledgling by filmmakers, by artists that the world had never really heard at that point, the now legendary Trey Parker and Matt Stone. And that little cable show called South Park ended up being one of the longest running animated shows of all time, I think second only to The Simpsons. And his voice through the first several seasons of that show really helped to propel the show. Um, he didn't necessarily part with Trey Parker and Matt Stone on the best of terms, but nevertheless, that was an important part of his career because not only did it feature his speaking voice for voiceovers, but he performed and recorded and wrote a lot of songs for the series because even though his role, he was playing the role of the school chef called Jerome Chef McElroy, he was still someone who showed off his musical side. And that, I think, was important in that it introduced the music of Isaac Hayes to a new generation who hopefully will go back and listen to not only his wonderful solo catalog, particularly from the 70s, but the fact that he collaborated with so many legends from Otis Redding and Wilson Pickett, Donald Byrd, Albert King, Dionne Warwick, Rufus Thomas, Eddie Floyd, Sam and Dave. The list goes on. And again, I honestly think that his arrangements are really what made him so unique because a great song can be made less interesting if it has a bad arrangement. And Isaac Hayes assured that whether it was his songs that he was writing for himself to perform or for others, it was always perfect. So here's to Isaac Hayes, one of the great artists of all time. Like, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Take care.